Good morning, good day, good evening. We are here to read chapter 10 of Selma Lagerlöf's book, The Saga of Gösta Berling. Chapter 10 is called The Young Countess. So we've just had chapter 9, which was the auction at Björne. Very good chapter. And we're just going to have to see what's going to happen here in chapter 10. Here we go. The young countess sleeps until 10 o'clock in the morning and wants fresh bread on the breakfast table every day. The young countess does tambour stitching and reads poetry. She knows nothing about weaving and food preparation. The young countess is spoiled. But the young countess is happy and lets her cheerfulness shine over everything and everyone. Her long morning sleep and the fresh bread are gladly forgiven, because she lavishes good deeds on the poor and is friendly to everyone. The father of the young countess is a Swedish aristocrat who has lived in Italy his whole life, detained there by the beautiful countryside, and one of that beautiful country's loveliest daughters. When Count Henrik Dohna was traveling in Italy, he had been received in the home of this nobleman, made the acquaintance of his daughters, married one of them, and brought her with him to Sweden. She, who had always been able to speak Swedish and was brought up to love everything Swedish, feels quite at home up in the bare country. She spins around so happily in the long dance of amusements that whirl around Löwen's long lake that one might believe she had always lived up there. Little does she understand, however, what it is to be a countess. There is no ostentation, no stiffness, no condescending dignity in this young, happy being. It was the old gentleman who liked the young countess the most. It was remarkable what success she had with old gentlemen. When they had seen her at a ball, then you could be certain that the whole lot of them, the judge in Munkerud and the dean in Bro and Melchior Sinclair and the captain at Berga, would all explain to their wives in deepest confidence that if they had met the young countess 40 or 30 years ago, yes, then she was not even born yet, the old wives say. And the next time they meet, they tease the young countess for taking the old gentleman's hearts from them. The old wives view her with a certain anxiety. They remember Countess Marta so well. She had been just as happy and good and beloved when she came to Berga the first time. And of her there had only become a vain pleasure-seeking coquette who nowadays could think of nothing but her diversions. If she only had a husband who could keep her to work, the old wives say. If only she could set up a loom. For setting up looms, that consoles all sorrows, that devours all interests. That has been the salvation of many women. The young countess would gladly become a good housewife. She knows nothing better than living as a happy wife in a good home, and she often comes to the large gatherings and sits down with the old women. Henrik really wants me to learn to be a capable housekeeper, she says, like his mother is. Teach me how you set up a loom. Then the old woman let out a twofold sigh. First, for Count Henrik, who believes that his mother is a capable housekeeper, and second, over the difficulty of initiating this young, ignorant being in such complicated things. You only need to talk with her about lee and heddle, about harness and pulleys, about plain weave and tabby, before her head starts spinning, much less when the talk goes to bird's eye and goose eye and overshot. Must be a lot of deep technical terms that are used in weaving of a loom. No one who sees the young countess can help but wonder why she married the stupid Count Henrik. Pity the person who is stupid. You have to feel sorry for him, whoever he is, wherever he is. And you have to feel the sorriest for anyone who is stupid and lives in Värmland. There were already many stories about Count Henrik's stupidity and he is no more than a few years over the age of 20. It might be mentioned how he entertained Anna Stjernhök at a sleighing party a few years ago. "You are beautiful, Anna," he said. "You talk, Henrik." "You are the most beautiful in all of Värmland." "I'm certainly not." "You are the most beautiful at this sleighing party, anyway." "Oh, Henrik, I'm not either." "Yes, but you must be the most beautiful in this sleigh. That you can't deny." No, she couldn't. For Count Henrik is not beautiful. He is as ugly as he is stupid. They usually say about him that the head that sits on his thin neck had been handed down in his family for a few 100 years. That is why the brain is so used up in the most recent heir. It is clear that he has no head of his own, it is said. He's borrowed his father's, and he doesn't dare bow his head. He's afraid of losing it. He already has yellowed skin and a wrinkled forehead. That head has probably been in use on both the father and the grandfather. Why else would his hair be so thin, and his lips so bloodless, and his chin so pointed? He always has troublemakers around him who entice him into saying stupid things and then collect them, spread them, and enable them. It is a good thing for him that he doesn't notice anything. He is solemn and dignified in all his conduct. Can he imagine that others are not that way too? Dignity has settled into his body. He moves deliberately. He walks straight. He never twists his head without his whole body following along. He had been in Munkerud at the judge's a few years before. He had come riding, wearing a high hat, yellow trousers, and shiny boots, and sat stiff and proud in the saddle. All went well upon his arrival. But when he was to ride away again, it happened that one of the hanging branches in the lane of birches knocked off his hat. He got off, put on the hat, and again rode forth under the same branch. Again the hat was knocked off. This was repeated 4 times. Finally the sheriff went up to him and said, "What if you were to ride to one side of the branch next time?" The 5th time he came successfully past the branch. But it is the case, however, that the young countess likes him, despite his old man's head. She didn't know, of course, that in his own country he was surrounded by such a martyr's crown of stupidity when she saw him down in Rome. Abroad there had been some radiance of youth about him, and they had been untied, and they had been united under such extremely romantic circumstances. You should only hear the countess tell about how Count Henrik had to abduct her. Monks and cardinals had fallen into a rage because she wanted to abandon her mother's religion, to which she had previously adhered, and become a Protestant. The hoi polloi had been in an uproar. Her father's palace had been besieged. Henrik was pursued by bandits. Mother and sister had pleaded with him to forego the marriage, but her father was furious that the Italian mob would hinder him from giving his daughter to whomever he wanted. He ordered Count Henrik to abduct her, and so, because it was impossible for them to get married at home without it being discovered, she and Henrik sneaked away on back streets and all kinds of dark roads to the Swedish consulate. And when she had renounced her Catholic faith there and become a Protestant, they were immediately wed and sent off northward in a rapidly driven travel carriage. There wasn't time to read the banns, you see. There just wasn't time, the young countess would say. And it was gloomy, of course, getting married at a consulate, and not in one of the beautiful churches, but otherwise Henrik would have had to be without me. Down there, everyone is so hot-tempered. Mama and Papa and cardinals and monks, everyone is hot-tempered. That is why everything had to be done so secretly, and if the people had seen us sneak away from home, they would surely have killed the both of us to save my soul. Henrik was, of course, already doomed to damnation. But the young countess loves her husband, even since they have come home to Borg and are living a more settled life. She loves the radiance in him, from the ancient name and his heroic forefathers. She likes to see how her presence softens the stiffness in his being, and to hear how his voice becomes tender when she is talking to him. And besides, he cares for her and spoils her, and then after all she is married to him. The young countess can simply not imagine that a married woman would not love her husband. In a certain respect, he also corresponds to her ideal of manliness. He is upright and a lover of truth. He has never gone back on his given word. She considers him a true nobleman. On the 8th of March, Sheriff Scharling celebrates his birthday, and then a lot of people are traveling up the Broby Hills. Then people from east and west, familiar and unfamiliar, invited and uninvited, always come to the sheriff's farm. Everyone is welcome. All will find plenty of food and drink, and in the ballroom there will be elbow room enough for eager dancers from 7 parishes. The young countess is coming too, just as she goes any place where dance and merriment can be expected. But the young woman is not happy when she arrives. It is as if she had a premonition that now it was her turn to be dragged into the wild hunt of adventure. On the way she sat observing the sinking sun. It came down from a clear sky, leaving no gold rims on puffy clouds behind. Pale gray twilight air, shot through by cold storm winds, blanketed the area. The young countess saw how the day and night were fighting, and how all living things were seized with terror at the struggle between the two mighty forces. The horses hastened away with the last load, so as to soon come under a roof. The woodcutters hurried home from the forest, the maids from the barn. The wild animals were howling at the forest edge. The day, the favorite of humankind, had been conquered. The light went out, colors turned pale, cold and ugliness were all she saw. What she had hoped, what she had loved, what she had done seemed to her also to be enshrouded in the gray twilight. It was the hour of fatigue, defeat, powerlessness, for her as for all of nature. She was thinking that her own heart, which now in its sparkling joy enveloped existence in purple and gold, she was thinking that this heart would perhaps one day lose its power to lighten up her world. "Oh, powerlessness, my own heart's powerlessness," she said to herself. "Suffocating gray twilight goddess, one day you will be the mistress of my soul. Then I will see life as ugly and gray, as perhaps it really is. Then my hair will whiten, my back be bent, my brain paralyzed." Just then, the sleigh turned into the sheriff's farm, and as the young countess was just then looking up, her eyes fell on a grated window in a side building and at a sternly staring face behind it. This face belonged to the majoress at Akeby, and the young woman knew that now her enjoyment was ruined for that evening. It is possible to be happy when you don't see sorrow, simply hear it being talked about like a guest in a foreign land. It is harder to preserve the heart's happiness when you stand eye to eye with night-black, sternly staring distress. The Countess probably knows that Sheriff Scharling has put the majoress in jail, and that she must undergo interrogation for the acts of violence she carried out at Akeby the same night the great ball was held there. But she has simply not imagined that she would be kept in custody there at the sheriff's farm, so close to the ballroom that from there you could see into her room, so close that she must hear the dance music and the happy clamor. And now the thought of her takes away all the Countess's joy. The young Countess does dance both a waltz and a quadrille. She does take part in both the minuet and the anglaise, but between each dance she has to slip over to the window and look over at the side building. There is light in the majoress's window, and she can see how she paces back and forth in her room. She seems to never rest, but paces constantly. The Countess has no joy at all from the dance. She is only thinking about how the majoress is pacing back and forth in her prison like a captured animal. She marvels that all the others can dance. Certainly there are many who are just as upset as she from knowing that the majoress is so near to them, and yet there is no one who lets on, or forbearing people live in Vermland. But for every time she has looked out, her feet move more heavily in the dance, and laughter seems to catch in her throat. The sheriff's wife notices her as she wipes the condensation from the window pane to see out, and comes over to her. "Such a nuisance! Oh, such a nuisance this is!" she whispers to the Countess. "I think it's almost impossible to dance this evening," the Countess whispers back. "It is not my wish either that we have a ball here while she is imprisoned there," answers Mrs. Scharling. "She has been in Karlstad the whole time since she was arrested. Now her interrogation will soon take place, and that's why she was brought here today. We couldn't put her in the miserable jail at the courthouse, so she had to be in the weaving room, in the side building. She should have been allowed to be in my drawing room, Countess, if all of these people hadn't been coming just today. You hardly know her, Countess, but she has been like a mother and a queen to all of us. What will she think of us who are dancing here, while she is in such great distress? It's just as well that most of them don't know she's there." "She ought never to have been arrested," the young Countess said sternly. "No, that is a true word, Countess, but there was no other way. If even worse misfortunes weren't going to happen. No one thought she would set fire to her own haystacks and drive away the cavaliers, but the major, of course, was prowling around on the hunt for her. God knows what he would have done if she hadn't been locked up. Scharling has had to suffer a lot of mortification because he arrested the majoress, Countess. Even in Karlstad they were dissatisfied with him because he didn't look the other way about everything that was happening at Ekeby. But he did what he believed was best." "But now she'll be convicted, won't she?" says the Countess. "Oh no, Countess, she won't be convicted. The majoress at Ekeby will probably be set free, but that is still too much for her. All of this that she has had to bear in recent days. She'll probably go crazy. You can understand such a proud woman. How can she stand being treated like a criminal? I think that it would have been best if she had been allowed to go free. Perhaps she would have escaped on her own." "Let her loose," says the Countess. "Anyone other than the sheriff or his wife can do it, of course," whispers Mrs. Scharling. "We do have to guard her, especially tonight when so many of her friends are here. 2 fellows are standing guard outside the door so that no one can get into her. But if someone were to take her out, Countess, then we would both be happy, both Scharling and I." "Might I be allowed to go to her?" says the young Countess. Mrs. Scharling grasps her eagerly around the wrist and leads her out. In the entryway they throw on a pair of shawls, and then they hurry across the yard. "It is not certain that she will even talk to us," says the sheriff's wife, "but she can still see that we haven't forgotten her." They come into the first room of the side building, where the 2 men are guarding the barred door, and without being obstructed, they go into the majoress. She is staying in a large room filled with looms and other equipment. It is actually used as a weaving room, but it has bars on the windows and strong locks on the door, so that in emergencies it can be used as a jail. Inside, the majoress continues to pace without paying visible heed to them. She has embarked on a long journey these days. She cannot recall anything other than that she is walking the 120 some miles up to her mother, who is sitting up there in the Elvdal forests, waiting for her. She never has time to rest. She has to walk. Restless urgency has overtaken her. Her mother is over 90. She has measured up the length of the floor in ells, and now she is counting the laps, adding up the ells to cords and the cords to half miles and miles. Her way seems heavy and long, and yet she dares not rest. She wades forth through deep drifts. She hears the endless forests sighing over her as she walks. She rests in the Finn's cabin and in the charcoal burner's hut for branches. She rests in the Finn's cabin and in the charcoal burner's hut of branches. You know, they had Finns living there to work in the forest, right? So the Finns had a hut. Sometimes, when there is no other person within several miles, she has to break off branches into a shelter and rest under the root of an overturned spruce. And finally, she has reached the goal. The 120 some miles are over. The forest opens, and red buildings stand on a snow-covered yard. The Klara River rushes foaming along in a series of small rapids. And from the familiar roar, she hears that she is home, and her mother, who could see her coming, begging, just as she knew she would, comes to meet her. When the Majoress has come that far, she always looks up, glances around her, sees the closed door, and knows where she is. Then she wonders if she is going crazy and sits down to think and rest. But after a while, she is in motion again, adding up the ells and cords to half miles and miles, taking brief rests in Finn's cabins, and sleeping neither night nor day before she has again covered those more than 120 some miles. During the entire time she has been imprisoned, she has almost never slept, and both of the women who have come to see her look at her with anxiety. The young Countess would later always remember her the way she was walking there now. Later, she sees her often in her dreams and then awakens from the sight with her eyes wet with tears and a lament on her lips. The old woman is anxiously run down. Her hair looks thin, and loose strands are forcing their way out of her narrow braid. Her face is slack and sunken, her clothes untidy and torn. But despite all this, she has so much of the lofty, generally inviting mistress remaining that she does not simply inspire pity, but veneration as well. But what the Countess would clearly recall were the eyes, sunken, turned in, not yet robbed of all the light of reason, but almost ready to go out, and with a spark of wildness lurking in the depths, so that you had to fear that the old woman might attack you at any moment, her teeth ready to bite, fingers ready to claw. They have now been standing there a good while, when the Majoress suddenly stops before the young woman and looks at her with a stern gaze. The Countess takes a step back and grasps Mrs. Scharling's arm. The Majoress's features suddenly gain life and expression. Her eyes look out into the world with complete comprehension. "Oh no, she says, and smiles. "It's not that bad yet, my dear young lady." She invites them to sit down and also sits down herself. She takes on an air of old-fashioned stateliness, familiar from the great parties at Ekeby and the royal balls and the governor's residence in Karlstad. They forget the rags and the jail and see only the proudest and richest woman in Värmland. "My dear Countess," she says, "what might induce you to leave the dance to come and see a lonely old woman like me? You must be very good." Countess Elizabeth cannot reply. Her voice is choked with emotion. Mrs. Scharling answers in her place. that she has not been able to dance because she has been thinking about the majoress. "Dear Mrs. Charling," answers the majoress, "am I so far gone that I disturb the young people in their enjoyment? You mustn't cry over me, my dear young countess," she continued. "I am a mean old woman who deserves her fate. You don't think it's right to strike your mother, do you?" "No, but—" The majoress interrupts her and brushes the curly light hair off of her forehead. "Child, child," she says, "how could you go and get married to that stupid Henrik Dona?" "But I love him." "I see how it is. I see how it is," says the majoress. "A nice child and nothing more, weeps with the distressed and laughs with the happy, and forced to say yes to the first one who says I love you. Yes, indeed, yes. Go in and dance now, my dear young countess. Dance and be happy. There is nothing bad in you." "But I want to do something for the majoress." "Child," says the majoress solemnly, "an old woman lived at Akeby who kept the winds and the heavens captive. Now she is imprisoned, and the winds are free. It is strange that a storm is passing over. Is it strange that a storm is passing over the land? I, who am old, have seen it before, Countess. I feel it. I know that the thundering storm of God is coming over us. First it sweeps forth over the large realms, then over the small, forgotten communities. God's storm forgets no one, so it passes over the great as well as the small. It is a fine thing to see God's storm coming." "God's storm? The blessed Lord's weather is blowing across the earth. Voices in the air, voices in the waters, they sound and terrify. Make God's storm thundering, make God's storm terrifying. May the squalls move out across the land, rush forth against tottering walls, breaking the locks that have rusted and the houses that lean about to fall. Anxiety will spread across the land. The small birds' nests will fall from their strongholds on the branch. The hawk's nest at the top of the pine will be cut to the earth with a loud boom. And the wind will hiss with its dragon tongue all the way into the owl's nest in the crevice of the rock. We thought that everything was fine here with us, but it was not. God's storm is probably needed. I understand it, and I am not complaining. I simply want to be allowed to go to my mother." She suddenly breaks down. "Go now, young woman," she says. "I have no more time. I have to go. Go now and watch out for those who are riding on the storm clouds." With that she resumed her wandering. Her features slackened, her gaze turned inward. The Countess and Mrs. Charling had to leave her. As soon as they were in among the dancers again, the young Countess went right up to Gösta Berling. "I bring greetings to Mr. Berling from the majoress," she says. "She is waiting for Mr. Berling to take her out of the prison." "Then she'll just have to wait, Countess." "Oh, help her, Mr. Berling." Gösta gazes darkly before him. "No," he says. "Why should I help her? What debt of gratitude do I have for her? Everything that she has done for me has been to my undoing." "But, Mr. Berling—" "If she had never existed," he says heatedly, "I would now be sleeping up there under the endless forests. Should I be obliged to risk my life for her because she made me a cavalier at Akeby? Do you believe, Countess, that much distinction goes along with that position?" The young Countess turns away from him without answering. She is angry. She goes over to her place, thinking bitter thoughts about the cavaliers. They have come here with horns and fiddles and intend to let the bows rub against the strings until the horsehair is worn out, without thinking that the merry notes resound over to the prisoner's miserable room. They have come here to dance until the soles of their shoes turn to dust. And it doesn't occur to them that their old benefactress can see their shadows sweeping past within the steamed-up window panes. Oh, how gray and ugly the world became! Oh, what a shadow distress and hard-heartedness cast across the young countess's soul. After a while, Gösta comes to invite her to dance. She refuses abruptly. "Don't you want to dance with me, Countess?" he asks, turning very red. "Not with you, nor with any other of the Ekeby cavaliers," she says. "So we are not worthy of such an honor?" "It's no honor, Mr. Berling, but I find no enjoyment in dancing with those who forget all the dictates of gratitude." Gösta has already turned on his heels. This scene is heard and seen by many. All think the Countess is right. The cavaliers' ingratitude and heartlessness towards the majoress have aroused a general indignation. But in those days, Gösta Berling is more dangerous than a wild animal in the forest. Ever since he came home from the hunt and found Marianne gone, his heart has been like an aching sore. He has a good mind to inflict a bloody injustice on someone and spread sorrow and torment in wide circles. Ooh, tough days. If she wants it that way, he says to himself, then it will be as she wants. But she won't get to spare her own hide either. The young countess likes abductions. She will get her fill. He has nothing against an adventure. For 8 days he has been grieving for the sake of a woman. That may be long enough. He calls Berenkreutz the colonel and Christian Berg the strong captain, and the phlegmatic cousin Christopher, who never hesitates at a deranged adventure, and seeks counsel with them about how the offended honor of the cavaliers should be avenged. Then comes the end of the banquet. A long row of sleighs drives up to the yard. The gentlemen put on their furs. The ladies look for their coats in the hopeless disorder of the dressing room. The young countess has been in a hurry to leave this hateful ball. She is the first one. She is the first one done of the ladies. She stands, smiling, in the middle of the floor and watches the confusion as the door is thrown open and Gösta Berling appears on the threshold. No man has the right to force his way into this room, however. Old ladies stand there in their thin hair after they have pulled off their decorative caps. And the young women have hiked up their skirts under the furs so that the stiff frills will not pinch during the ride home. But without paying any heed to the cries to stop, Gösta Berling rushes over to the Countess and seizes her. And he lifts her in his arms and races out of the room to the entryway and from there out onto the stairs with her. The shrieks of the surprised women could not stop him. As they hurry after, they see only how he throws himself into a sleigh with the Countess in his arms. He's abducted the Countess. They hear the driver crack the whip and see the horse set off. They know the driver is Berenkreutz. They know the horse. It is Don Juan. And in deep distress at the fate of the Countess, they call on the men. And they do not waste time asking many questions. Instead, they rush to the sleighs, and with the Count in the lead, they chase after the abductor. But he is lying in the sleigh, holding fast to the young Countess. He has forgotten all sorrow, and dizzy with the intoxicating pleasure of the adventure, he is singing at full volume a ballad of love and roses. He holds her pressed close to him, but she makes no attempt to flee. Her face, white and stony, is close to his chest. Oh, what should a man do when he has a pale, helpless face so close to him? When he sees the light hair that otherwise shadows the white, radiant forehead pushed back, and when the eyelids have closed heavily over the roguish glitter of gray eyes? What should a man do when the red lips are fading away under his eyes? Kiss, then, naturally. Kiss the fading lips, the closed eyes, the white forehead. But then the young woman wakes up. She pulls away. She is like a coiled spring, and he has to struggle with all of his strength to keep her from throwing herself out of the sleigh, until he forces her, subdued and trembling, down into one corner of the sleigh. Look, Gösta then says quite calmly to Bernkreutz. The Countess is the third one that Don Juan and I are carrying off this winter, but the others clung to my neck with kisses, and she will neither be kissed by me nor dance with me. Can you figure these women out, Bernkreutz? But as Gösta drove from the farm, as the women shouted and the men swore, as the sleigh bells jingled and the whips cracked and everything was shouting in confusion, the men who were guarding the majoress began to feel strangely uneasy. What's going on, they thought. What are they shouting about? Suddenly the door flew open, and a voice called to them, She is gone. Now he's leaving with her. They ran out, running like madmen, without looking to see whether it was the majoress or who it was who was gone. Luck was with them, so that they even got into one of the sleighs speeding away, and they drove both long and well before they found out who it was that they were pursuing. But Berg and cousin Christopher went calmly up to the door, broke the lock, and opened it for the majoress. You are free, majoress, they said. She came out. They stood straight as sticks on either side of the door and did not look at her. You have a horse and a sleigh outside there, majoress. Then she went out, settled into the vehicle, and drove away. No one pursued her. No one knew where she was going either. On the Broby hills, Don Juan hurries towards the ice-covered surface of Leuven. The proud runner is flying forth. Bracing, ice-cold air whistles past the rider's cheeks. The sleigh bells ring. Stars and moon are shining. The snow is blue-white, shining with its own luster. Gösta senses poetic thoughts awakening within him. Bernkreutz, he says, look, this is life. Just as Don Juan races away with the young woman, so time races away with every person. You are necessity guiding the journey. I am desire who captures free will, and so she is pulled, the powerless one, ever deeper and deeper downward. Don't talk, roars Bernkreutz. Now they're coming after us. And with whistling strokes of the whip, he eggs Don Juan on to an ever wilder pace. There are the wolves. Hear the prey, Gösta cries out. Don Juan, my lad, imagine that you are a young moose. Rush forth through the thicket, wade through the marsh, take a leap from the mountain ridge down into the clear lake, swim across it with courageously uplifted head, and vanish into the saving darkness of the dense pine forest. Run, Don Juan, old abductor, run like a young moose. Delight fills his wild heart at the hastening pace. The shouts of the pursuers are for him a song of rejoicing. Delight fills his wild heart as he feels the Countess's body shaking with terror as she hears her teeth rattling. Suddenly the iron grip by which he has her held is loosened. He stands up in the sleigh and waves his cap. I am Gösta Berling, he shouts, Lord of 10,000 kisses and 13,000 love letters. Cheers for Gösta Berling. Catch him if you can. And at the next moment he is whispering in the Countess's ear, Isn't this a good pace? Isn't this a royal ride? Beyond Leuven lies Vänern. Beyond Vänern lies the sea. Everywhere endless expanses of clear, blue-black ice, and beyond that a radiant world. Rolling thunder in the freezing ice, harsh cries behind us, shooting stars above, and clinging sleigh bells before us. Onward, always onward. Do you have the desire to try that journey, young lovely lady? He has set her free. She pushes him intensely from her. The next moment finds him on his knees at her feet. I am a wretch, a wretch. The Countess should not have provoked me. You stood there so proud and fine, never believing that a cavalier's fist could reach you. Heaven and earth love you. You should not increase the burden for those whom heaven and earth despise. He pulls her hands to him and raises them to his face. "If you only knew," he says, "what it is to know yourself to be rejected. No one asks what you are doing. No, no one asks." At the same moment, he notices that she has nothing on her hands. He pulls a pair of large leather gloves out of his pocket and puts them on her. With that, he has once again become completely calm. He adjusts himself in the sleigh, as far from the young countess as possible. "The countess does not need to be afraid," he says. "Don't you see where we're going, countess? You can understand that we don't dare do you any harm." She, who had been almost out of her mind with fear, now sees that they have already driven across the lake, and that Don Juan is struggling up the steep hills at Borg. They stop the horse by the stairs to the Count's estate, and let the young countess get out of the sleigh at the door to her own home. But when she is surrounded by servants who come rushing out, she regains her courage and presence of mind. "Take care of the horse, Anderson," she says to the driver. "Would these gentlemen who have driven me home be so kind as to come in for a while? The Count will be coming soon." "As the Countess wishes," says Gösta, getting out of the sleigh at once. Berenkreutz casts the reins aside without a moment's hesitation, but the young countess goes before them and shows them into the parlor with ill-concealed schadenfreude. Right? She's happy about their misery. The Countess probably expected that the cavaliers would hesitate at the suggestion to wait for her husband. They didn't know then what a stern, upright man he was. They didn't fear the Inquisition he would hold with them, who had violently seized her and forced her to ride with them. She wanted to hear him forbid them to set foot in her home ever again. She wanted to see him call in the servants to point out the cavaliers as men whom they would henceforth never let pass the gates of Borg. She wanted to hear him express his contempt, not only at what they had done to her, but also at their way of treating the old majoress, their benefactress. He, who to her was pure tenderness and indulgence, he would rise up in righteous severity against her oppressors. Love would put fire in his words. He who protected and respected her as a being of a finer type than any other, he would not allow vulgar men to swoop down on her like birds of prey on a sparrow. She was glowing with a thirst for vengeance. Berenkreutz, the colonel with the dense white mustaches, however, stepped undauntedly into the dining room and went over to the fire, which was always lit when the Countess came home from a party. Gösta stopped in the darkness by the door, silently observing the Countess, while the servant relieved her of her outer clothes. As he watched this young woman, he became happier than he had been for many years. It became so clear to him. It was as certain to him as a revelation, although he did not understand how he had discovered it, that within her she had the loveliest soul. For the time being it was bound and slumbering, but it would no doubt emerge. He became so happy at having discovered all the purity and piety and innocence that dwelled deep within her. He was almost ready to laugh at her, because she looked so angry, and stood with cheeks glowing and eyebrows knitted. "You don't know how gentle and good you are," he thought. That side of her being that was turned toward the material world would never do her inner self complete justice, he thought. But Gösta Berling must be her servant from this moment, the way all that is beautiful and divine must be served. Yes, there was no use regretting that he had just carried on so violently toward her. If she had not been so afraid, if she had not pushed him aside so tempestuously, if he had not perceived how all of her being was agitated by his brutality, then he would never have known what a fine and noble spirit resided within her. He could not have believed it more. She had simply been merriment and an eagerness to dance, And then she had been able to get married to the stupid Count Henrik. Yes, now he would be her slave until his death, dog and thrall, as Captain Christian would say, and nothing more. He sat down by the door, Gösta Berling, and with clasped hands held a kind of church service. Not since that day when, for the first time, he felt inspiration's tongue of fire upon him, had he experienced such holiness in his soul. He did not let himself be disturbed, although Count Dona came in with a number of people who swore and lamented at the cavalier's behavior. He let Berenkreutz receive the storm. In indolent calm, this man, tested in many adventures, stood over by the fire. He had set his foot up on the grating, rested his elbow on his knee, and his chin on his hand, and looked at those who came storming in. "What is all this supposed to mean?" the little count roared at him. "It means," he said, "that as long as there are womenfolk on the earth, there will also be fools who dance to their tune." The young count became red in the face. "I am asking what this means," he repeated. "I'm asking that too," mocked Berenkreutz. "I'm asking what it means that Henrik Dona's Countess doesn't want to dance with Gösta Berling." The count turned questioningly towards his wife. "I couldn't do it, Henrik," she exclaimed. "I couldn't dance with him or any of them. I was thinking about the majoress, who they let languish in jail." The little count straightened out his stiff body and raised his old man's head. "We cavaliers," said Berenkreutz, "allow no one to insult us. Anyone who doesn't want to dance with us must ride with us. No harm has been done to the Countess, and with that the matter can be over." "No," said the Count, "the matter cannot be over with that. I am the one who answers for my wife's actions. Now I am asking why Gösta Berling did not turn to me to get satisfaction when my wife had offended him." I guess that's how they did it in the 1820s in Värmland. Berenkreutz smiled. "I am asking," repeated the Count. "You don't ask the fox for permission to take his hide off," said Berenkreutz. The Count put his hand on his narrow chest. "I have a reputation for being a just man," he burst out. "I can judge my servants. Why should I not be able to judge my wife? The cavaliers do not have the right to judge her. I void the punishment which they have applied to her. It has never happened. Do you understand, gentlemen? It has never happened." The Count shouted out these words in the highest falsetto. "It has never happened. Do you understand, gentlemen? It has never happened." The Count shouted out these words in the highest falsetto. Berenkreutz cast a quick glance out over the congregation. There was not one of those present, Sintram and Daniel Bendix and Dahlberg and all, whoever it might have been who had followed along inside. There was not one of them who was not enjoying how he was fooling the stupid Henrik Dona. The young Countess understood at once. What was it that should count for nothing? Her anxiety? The cavalier's hard grip on her tender body? The wild song? The wild words? The wild kisses? Should all that not have happened? Did this evening not exist, over which the gray twilight goddess did not rule? "But Henrik—" "Silence," he said, and he straightened up to give her a lecture as a punishment. "Curse you, that you, who are a woman, have wanted to set yourself up as a judge over men," he says. "Curse you, that you, who are my wife, dares to offend someone whose hand I gladly grasp. What do you have to do with the cavaliers having put the majoress in jail? Didn't they have the right? You can never know how a man must be enraged in the depths of his soul when he hears talk of women's infidelity. Do you yourself intend to walk that evil path, since you are coming to the defense of such a woman?" "But Henrik—" She complained like a child and stretched out her arms as if to ward off the angry words. She had perhaps never heard such hard words directed at her. She was so helpless among those hard men, and now her only defender turned against her. Nevermore would her heart have the power to light up the world. But Henrik, it's you after all, who should protect me. Gösta Berling was attentive now, when it was too late. To be sure, he didn't know what he should do. He wished her so well, but he dared not force his way in between husband and wife. "Where is Gösta Berling?" the Count inquired. "Here," said Gösta, and he made a pitiful attempt to laugh off the matter. "The Count was just about to give a speech, and I fell asleep. What would the Count say if we were to go home now and let you go to bed?" "Gösta Berling, because my Countess has refused to dance with you, I command that she kiss your hand and ask you for forgiveness." "My dear Count Henrik," said Gösta, smiling, "this is not a hand that is suitable for a young woman to kiss. Yesterday it was red with blood from a wounded moose. Tonight black with soot after a fist fight with a charcoal burner. The Count has pronounced a noble and high-minded sentence. That is satisfaction enough. Come, Berenkreutz." The Count placed himself in the way. "Don't go," he said. "My wife must obey me. I want my Countess to know where willful behavior will lead." Gösta stopped, helpless. The Countess was completely pale, but she did not move. "Go," said the Count. "Henrik, I cannot." "You can," said the Count sternly. "You can. But I know what you want. You want to force me to fight with this man because you, in your capriciousness, do not like him. Well then, if you do not want to give him satisfaction, then I will. It is always dear to you women if men are killed for your sakes. You have committed the wrong, but will not redeem it, so I have to do it. I will fight a duel, my Countess. In a few hours, I will be a bloody corpse." She gave him a long look, and she saw him as he was, stupid, cowardly, inflated with arrogance and vanity, the most lamentable of people. "Calm down," she said, and she had become as cold as ice. "I will do it." But now Gösta Berling was completely beside himself. "You may not, Countess. No, you may not. You are only a child after all, a weak, innocent child, and you would kiss my hand. You have such a white, lovely soul. I will never get close to you again. Oh, never again. I bring death and destruction over everything, good and guiltless. You must not touch me. I tremble before you like fire before water. You may not." He struck his hands behind his back. "That means nothing to me, Mr. Berling. Now it means nothing to me. I ask you your forgiveness. I ask you to let me kiss your hand." Gösta kept his hands behind his back. He considered his position. He approached the door. "If you do not accept this satisfaction that my wife is offering, I must fight with you, Gösta Berling, and I must impose another, harder punishment on her besides." The Countess shrugged her shoulders. "He is crazy with cowardice," she whispered. "Let it happen now. It means nothing that I am humiliated. That is just what you wanted the whole time." "Did I want that? Do you think that I wanted that? Well, if I no longer have any hands to kiss, then you must see that I haven't wanted that," he exclaimed. He ran over to the fire and put his hands into it. The flames wrapped around them, the skin wrinkled, the nails crackled. But at the same moment, Berenkreutz caught him by the neck and threw him headlong onto the floor. He stumbled against a chair and remained sitting. He was almost ashamed at such a stupid prank. Would she not think that he simply did it to show off? Doing a thing like that in a room full of people would have to look stupid showing off. Would have to look like stupid showing off. There hadn't been a hint of danger. Before he could think about it, before he could think about getting up, the Countess was on her knees beside him. She took hold of the red, sooty hands and observed them. "I will kiss them, she exclaimed, "as soon as they are not too tender and sore." And the tears were streaming from her eyes as she saw the blisters rise up under the singed skin. Then he became like a revelation of an unknown magnificence for her, that such things could still happen on this earth, that such a thing could be done for her. No, what a man was this, ready for everything, magnificent in good as in evil, a man of great deeds, powerful words, a man of spectacular actions, a hero made from a different substance than others, slave of a caprice, of the desire of the moment, wild and terrible, but possessor of a savage power shrinking from nothing. She had been so dejected the entire evening, seen nothing but sorrow and cruelty and cowardice. Now all was forgiven. The young countess was again happy at being alive. The twilight goddess was beaten. The young countess saw light and color brighten the world. It was the same night up in the Cavalier's wing. There they were calling down curses over Gösta Berling. The old gentleman wanted to sleep, but it was impossible. He did not allow them any peace. It was in vain that they drew the bed curtains and blew out the candles. He simply talked. Now he let them know what an angel the young countess was and how he worshipped her. He would serve her, adore her. He was now content that everyone had abandoned him. Now he could devote a lifetime to her service. She despised him naturally, but he would be satisfied to lie at her feet like a dog. Had they given any notice to the island Lagon, out in Leuven? Had they seen it from the south, where the rugged cliff rises precipitously out of the water? Had they seen it from the north, where it sinks toward the lake in a slow descent, and where the narrow sandbank, overgrown with large, magnificent spruce trees, meanders up to the water's edge and forms the most marvelous ponds? Up there on the steep cliff top, where remnants of an old pirate fort still remain, he would build a palace to the young countess, a palace of marble, broad stairs at which boats covered with streamers could land, would be carved into the rock down to the lake. There would be radiant halls and high towers with gilded pinnacles. It would be a suitable residence for the young countess. The old wooden hovel on Borg's Point was not worthy for her to even set foot in. When he had held forth like that for a while, a few snores began to sound behind the yellow-checked curtains, but most of them swore and complained at him and his follies. "People," he then says solemnly, "I see the green earth covered by human works or by remnants of human works. The pyramids weigh down the earth. The Tower of Babel has pierced the sky. Lovely temples and gray castles have risen out of the ground. But of all the things that hands have built, what is there that has not fallen or will not fall? O people, throw down the trowel and the clay form. Spread the mason's apron over your head and lie down to build the bright palace of dreams. What does the spirit have to do with temples of stone and clay? Learn to build imperishable castles of dreams and visions." With that, he went laughing to rest. Learn to build imperishable castles of dreams and visions. When the Countess shortly afterward found out that the Majoress was freed, she sent a dinner invitation to the Cavaliers. And with that began her long friendship with Gösta Berling. That was a story. That was chapter 10 of Selma Lagerlöf's book, The Saga of Gösta Berling. The title was The Young Countess. And now she's good friends with Gösta Berling because of this episode with the Majoress. Next up will be chapter 11, which is called Ghost stories. Yeah. Stay tuned. Hope to see you again for the next chapter, chapter 11, Ghost Stories. Bye for now.